So my slides are visible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I must congratulate our Honorable RSSDI President, Dr. Bansi Sabu sir, and our Dr. Vasant Kumar sir, and our Honorable Secretary, Dr. Sanjay Agarwal sir, and for making me a part of this fantastic academic feast. And and my sincere thank to respected Chair Ma'am for the kind words. Friends, in the next, say, 20 minutes or so, I will be talking about management of inpatient hyperglycemia and focusing on critical care aspect of management of hyperglycemia. And we have just enjoyed the listening of Dr. Divya and Dr. Navneet, and many things has been touched upon for critical care scenario. And my focus will be more on ICU management, and I will be going to put more focus on that aspect. Plus, I will be giving you some clues where the pitfalls occur, or you can say where inadvertent mistakes occur. We commit something wrong during our hospital hyperglycemia management in ICU scenario. So these are my disclosures. Nothing to disclose, only to say that presentation is based on scientific evidences from various guidelines, national and international, and there is no conflict of interest and some sort of, you can say, that experience we have added to it. Now, friends, if we look at the Indian scenario of diabetes and hospitalization, there are two retrospective studies. One is Kapoor et al. Study and another one is Vassan et al. Study. Kapoor et al. Study was published in the Indian Journal of Medical Research in 2017, and whereas Vassan et al. Study was there in Journal of Diabetes in 2012. These are two retrospective studies. As diabetes gets complicated and the severity of complication increase, the people with diabetes, they spend more and more time in hospital for one or other reason, and more time in hospital is spent and more time is spent with health related issues, and the cost of treatment simply escalates like many folds. Now, diabetes accounts not only to the number of admissions that increases to 9% per se due to diabetes. It is not only the number of admission that gets increased somewhere around 8.2 or 9%. There is a 2 times higher mortality rates in patients with diabetes at admission compared to those patients who are not having diabetes at the time of admission. And this mortality is, you can say, around 40%. It is caused by your vascular disease. That means it can be myocardial infarction or stroke. 35% it is due to infections, progression of infection to sepsis and multi-organ failure. Rest 9% can be due to renal acute kidney injury or renal failure, and then 9% due to malignancy. So we can infer one thing, that hyperglycemia in inpatient scenario is associated with adverse outcome and twice increased mortality. Now, if I must say that it is not tough to understand here, courtesy COVID first and second wave, we have definitely appreciated, we can all appreciate that at admission, hyperglycemia is associated with adverse outcome. So if it is less than 200 milligram per DL at the time of admission, mortality is 10% and complication rates are 20%. Whereas just over 200, if you add 10, 15 milligram more than 200, it will be 15% as a mortality, and the complications rate grow by 30%. So the risk in hospital complication and death are significantly higher in those patients who are admitted with blood glucose at the time of admission more than the 200 milligram per deciliter. But this is not a criteria to diagnose hyperglycemia. It is just a random blood sugar value of 200 milligram per DL. Now, to define hyperglycemia in hospitalized patient, a random blood glucose concentration of 7.8 millimoles per liter, or it can be 140 milligram per DL as per the ADA and American Association of Clinical Endocrinology guidelines. But these patients who are having hyperglycemia in hospital, they are a heterogeneous group of patients. They are having different glucophenotype. Previously diagnosed diabetic patient can be there, where diabetes is diagnosed prior to the admission. You can have previously undiagnosed diabetic patient just at the time of the admission in the hospital ICU. They were diagnosed as a diabetic patient, and at admission, fasting plasma glucose, RPG, and HbA1c, they are fitting into the criteria of diagnosis of diabetes. And there are good number of patients which are having stress hyperglycemia. That means their fasting plasma glucose is 126 milligram per dl. Random blood glucose is more than 200 milligram per dl, but HbA1c value is less than 5.7%. And post-discharge, they go into normoglycemia. So that this message is that any patient having random blood sugar value of more than 140 in hospital, specifically in ICU, should undergo HbA1c testing so that we can dichotomize, or you can say we can have them segregate between whether they are previously undiagnosed diabetic patient or they are having stress hyperglycemia, because that has got deep implications. Consequences are very, very different in between these two patients. All these three have different consequences and implications. For the prevalence of hyperglycemia in critical illness patients, we have Plummer et al. Study. It was published in Intensive Care Medicine 2014. And this shows that around 50% patients, they have got critical illness associated hyperglycemia. 22% patients, they are already recognized case of diabetes, whereas 5.5% patients are unrecognized patients, the unrecognized diabetes patients. So overall, if you sum up or total, it is around 75% patients who are having hyperglycemia related issue in a critical care illness patients. So only 22.7% patients, they have got normoglycemia. So hyperglycemia in ICU is a very frequent in our setting. And this hyperglycemia is associated with increased mortality in critical illness patients. And the tipping point, it starts just at 80 to 90 milligram per dl, where the mortality is just 9.6%. And if you go from 100 to 200 milligram per dl, it is 2 times higher. If you go from 200 to 300, it is 3 times higher. And above 300, it is 4 times higher. And it is around 45% mortality. You can just see from this cartoon. So that means 45% mortality, half of your patient, nearly half of your patient will die if you don't do appropriate management in hyperglycemia related to critical illness. Now, another important finding, very interesting finding by Umphreys et al. It was published in Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism in 2002. Mortality rate is highest among newly diagnosed hyperglycemic patients. Even it is 3 to 3.5 fold higher than those patients who are known case of diabetes. And this newly hyperglycemic patients can have hyperglycemia due to stress, or you can call stress hyperglycemia, or they are previously unknown case of diabetes, first time diagnosed as diabetic during ICU stay, during ICU admission. And we will look into this, why this is there, why the cause they are having higher mortality. Now, what about pathophysiology, or you can say pathogenesis of hyperglycemia in hospitalized patients? There are 2 key components to remember. Number 1, there is either absolute or relative insulin deficiency. Secondly, there is increased counter-regulatory hormones, glucagon, catecholamines, cortisol, growth hormone, all they are escalated. Plus, there is inflammatory cytokine storm. You are all aware of this during COVID. Interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, 2 are to be remembered. They are very highly significant, the important insulin-resistant cytokines. They just block the efficiency of insulin everywhere. And then you can have exogenous factor, as Dr. Divya and Dr. Navneet has already told you, IV dextrose, glucocorticoid, parental nutrition, enteral nutrition, all they play with hyperglycemia, all lead to hyperglycemia, added to inflammatory cytokines. Then there can be endogenous factor. There is insulin resistance, and this insulin resistance leads to increased lipolysis. Fatty acids going into the circulation, glycerol going into the circulation, going to liver, there is increased glucose production, increased hepatic gluconeogenesis, there is decrease, also there is glycogenolysis, there is increased glucose output from the liver. Then there is another, you can say, raw material that is coming from the protein breakdown from the muscle due to catabolism. It is amino acids and lactate, which go to liver. Again, there is increased glucose output and production from the liver. Plus, there is decreased glucose utilization at the peripheral tissue, at the muscle specifically. All these lead to hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia due to osmotic issues, it can lead to circulatory and electrolyte effect. Again, increasing your insulin resistance. Volume depletion, hypoperfusion, electrolyte loss, and acid-base disturbances. And there can be tissue-related effect there can be cellular damage, reduced nitric oxide production, I nose goes up, E nose goes down. Then superoxide generation, then there is endothelial dysfunction, platelet activation, immune dysregulation, mitochondrial distress, mitochondrial injury, endoplasmic reticulum stress. They are the two key factors that happen, ultimately leading to progression of sepsis, multi-organ failure, and death. So we can have a complex interplay of both exogenous and endogenous factor, leading to vicious cycle of hyperglycemia, culminating into sepsis, multi-organ failure, and death. Now, why this stress hyperglycemia? Should we treat or we should not treat? Yes, we should treat. Earlier, it was thought that it is an adaptive and protective response that to divert the fuel to the stress, hypoxic, inflamed tissues, especially immune tissues and your nervous system, but it backfires. Also, there is down regulation of glucose transporter in your routine diabetic, old known diabetic patient, and at cellular level, there is decreased glucose transportation due to chronic hyperglycemia. But this adaptation doesn't happen in your stress hyperglycemic patient. And there is increased unchecked glucose ingress. That is also glucotoxicity. There is excessive counter-regulatory hormone secretion, more in stress hyperglycemia in comparison to known case of diabetes. Higher tissue and circulatory concentration of TNF-alpha and interleukin-6 has been reported in stress hyperglycemia in comparison to already known case of diabetes. So that's why we find 3 to 3.5-fold higher mortality in ICU patient with stress hyperglycemia versus known case of diabetes. So we should treat it appropriately. But there are certain issues, certain barriers to glycemic control in hospitalized patients, as has been already alluded to you. Diet can be one factor. There can be variable meals planning, variable meal timing. NPO orders can be there, use of enteral and parenteral nutrition, concomitant use of medication like glucocorticoid, certain antibiotics, and there is potential drug-to-drug interaction. There can be physiological factor per se. There is increased cytokine storm or cytokine inflammatory cytokines, acute illness-related issue. Then there can be physiological stress. There can be psychological stress. There can be impaired renal function. All these are the potent barriers to glycemic control in hospitalized patients. So to take care of these barriers and manage hyperglycemia in critical care illness patients appropriately, we have to have certain principles. Number one, once admitted to hospital, patient with hyperglycemia should be managed using either IV or subcutaneous insulin regimen. And IV insulin regimens are the best because of their rapidity of action, their predictable response, and their smoother control, and their safer control and easy titration. And these aspects are very important when you talk about critical illness. Most treatment algorithms, they recommend discontinuation of oral antidiabetic drugs and initiation of insulin analog or regular human insulin. Insulin is the preferred agent for glycemic control in hospitalized patients. And the goal of insulin therapy is to reach acceptable glucose target in the shortest duration of time with the minimal incidence of hypoglycemia. Now, two other important factors that are very important, inherently complex factor in inpatient scenario. Blood glucose, insulin requirement fluctuate with acute stress illness and surgery. Even simple bandages of burns or debridement, or you can say removal of abscess, can clearly change your whole glycemic factor. And your insulin requirement can go up and down with simple procedures. Transitions across specialties and inpatient location, going for MRIs and requiring other specialties, then patient can have different requirements, or insulin infusion can be off due to these transitions. Now, very important to know what target we should achieve. These are earlier debatable. Now, most of us are settling down, starting threshold for no higher than 180 milligram, 140 in diagnosed patient of diabetes, and 180 who are not diagnosed case of diabetes. Once IV insulin started, the glucose target should be maintained between 140 to 180. So we should not err. We should not sway between hypo and hyperglycemia. Lower glucose target of 110 and 140 may be appropriate in selected number of patients, selected group of patients. And what are these patients? These are cardiothoracic patients, cardiothoracic vascular surgery, bypass patients, neurosurgical ICU patient, IC bleed or intraspinal bleed. There can be stroke patient which require stronger, better control of glycemia from 110 to 140. Burns patient, sepsis patient, surgical ICU patient, where there is a maximum documentation of strict control of targets of 110 to 140, even less than that. So the targets, usually acceptable targets, recommended targets by American College of ADA 2021 is 140 to 180. Acceptable 110 to 140, but don't go too low to avoid hypoglycemia at all costs. Now, importantly, there are selected, these are important landmark trials, but they randomized controlled trials, which has been done in intensive glucose management, showing no benefit with intensive glucose treatment. And these are heterogeneous populations studied here. Some are done in surgical ICU patients, some are done in medical ICU patients, some are done in operating room scenario. But you can see there are different criteria, blood glucose targets different, blood glucose achieved different. But most of these, they say that intensive glucose treatment or targets, they are rather more harmful, less benefit, rather they are more harmful. And last one is NICE sugar study, 2009, around 6,000 patients, 3,000 in each arm, done in ICU scenario patient. Two targets were given. One was intensive target, another was in conventional target. Intensive target was 81 to 108, whereas conventional should be less than 180. And the target achieved in intensive arm was 115, and whereas conventional arm was achieving around 115 milligram per DL. And we looked at 90-day mortality, and it was 10.6% relative risk reduction favoring conventional treatment in comparison to intensive treatment arm in NICE sugar study. And this is that study which I am showing you here. So all-cause mortality at 90 days was less in conventional group control, whereas in comparison to intensive control patients. And look at the severe hypoglycemia. It was, you can say it is the 6-fold higher in intensive glucose control arm, 6.8% in comparison to just 0.5% in conventional treatment arm. So clearly advocating that conventional targets of less than 140 to 180 are acceptable to us. So this was depicted from NICE sugar trial, and most of the standard guidelines, both national and this RSSD guideline, and also our other international guideline, ADA, CDA, and Society of Critical Care Medicine, they are clearly now settling to this target in ICU of glucose target of around 140 to 180 milligram per DL. We have many IV insulin protocols. How to achieve this? Go by the insulin infusion, and we have got many insulin infusion protocols. But the most important line is that the exact protocol is probably less important, whichever you are following. It is more important that it should be, its presence in an institution and adaptation to the individual hospital needs. What does this mean? This means that ideal insulin protocol should be easily ordered. It should be signatured only. It should not have any calculation, not much calculation. It should not be computer based. Effective gets to target as early as possible. It should maintain blood glucose within a defined target range over several hours. It includes an algorithm for making temporary corrective increments or decrements in infusion rates. It should be safe. That means it should lead to minimal risk of hypoglycemia. And directions for treatment of hypoglycemia should be included in this protocol. It should be easily implemented, can be executed by nursing staff at their own with response to a single physician order. So it should be very, very simple to be understood by all our hospital staff and ICU medical officers. So we can adopt any protocol, but most of us are what we follow in our hospital, and I'm sure that most of us are following this updated ELA insulin infusion protocol, and it has got 5 steps. Step 1 is we start with insulin infusion, and how we make insulin infusion: we mix 1 unit regular human insulin per 1 ml 0.9% normal sodium chloride. So this we make a concentration of 1 unit is equal to 1 ml of the saline. We administer via infusion pump in increments of 0.5 unit per hour. Now, how much should be the infusion rate and how much we should start? It is the rule of thumb which can be used. Divide initial blood glucose by 100 and round to the nearest 0.5 unit for the bolus and the initial infusion rate. So that means if you have got 325 as the initial presenting blood sugars, You divide by 100, it is 3.25. Round up to 3.5. That means IV bolus 3.5 unit plus you start an infusion of 3.5 unit per hour. So it's very easy to understand. But importantly, priming of this tubing, priming of with this most of time this is forgotten. Priming with 20 to 30 ml insulin solution has to be done because the polyvinyl chloride or ethyl vinyl acetate or polyethylene plastic tubing, they have got absorption for insulin. So to saturate these insulin absorption sites for two plastic tubing walls, 20 to 30 ml insulin solution has to run down, and then you can start the fresh infusion. You can start the proper rate. So before that, you have to prime the whole of your tubing. And every time you change the tubing, you have to re-prime it again and again. And the subsequent rate adjustment has to change in infusion rate are determined by the current infusion rate and the hourly rate of change from the prior blood glucose level. So how to do it? This is the step 2. So we started with insulin infusion, we primed it, and we know the how to start, and we gave the bolus also. Now how to look at the how to do for the changing increment or decrease the dose. So whether the blood sugar is worsening or it is static or it is decreasing or improving appropriately. Now what is the appropriate improvement? It is 40 to 75 milligram per deciliter fall every hour. If you are sustaining this, then you are doing okay. You are on the right track. You can continue with the same dose. No drip change is required. But if there is an increment, suppose you are not able to achieve this, you are having worsening. That means you have increased the blood sugar by 50 to 75 milligram. Then you can have delta 1 delta increase. That means 1 or 2 unit increase in the basal rate that you can start. If you have got more than 100 increment, suppose you started with 300, now it is 500. That means you have to double the dose which you are using. You are using 3 units per hour. Now you have to go to 6 units per hour. So 2 delta change has to be given. Plus there is a trial which shows that you can even give another bolus also. You can repeat the bolus depending upon that blood sugar value. So this can be also given. So this is how. And suppose if you are decreasing too rapidly, it is 100 milligram per DL decrease per hour. So then you can decrease the dose, and make it 75%, make it 50% decrease. So this is very easy to do. And it is, once it is taught to your staff, or you can educate your medical officer, then it is very easy to do. But this is how the delta rate that can be changed depending upon the baseline infusion rate that can be changed, and also the how much increment is there, whether it is static or whether it is decreasing or decreasing in an appropriate way. But also look at the signs of ketosis in your patient. Never miss these signs of ketosis in your patient, because there can be worsening of saturation, there can be worsening of acid-base plan, and there can be electrolyte changes, and anion gap can also be looked at. So these are the issues we can plan for looking for the ketosis. And then if that is there, then you can go for the ketosis protocol also. Now, watch very diligently. Watch very diligently for hypoglycemia, because not only you should treat hyperglycemia, you have to avoid hypoglycemia, because hypoglycemia per se is detrimental to already stressed and under protected tissues and organs. So what you do, you give 25% dextrose. And this is the most common mistake. Most common mistake, inadvertently done, you run down the whole bottle of 25% dextrose, and that is 100 ml of 25% dextrose. Basically it is 250 milligram per ml. And if you run down 100 milligram of dextrose, and it is most commonly done by your staff, inadvertently done, and there can be rebound hyperglycemia. So the safe zone is between 100 to 150 if you're treating for hypoglycemia. Don't go away above 150 at all costs. Try to do it. And most of the time, in my scenario, I always advise my staff or senior person should stand at the side of the patient on the bedside, as you do for the thrombolysis in your myocardial infarction patient, acute MI patient. Stand there, give appropriate amount of 25% dextrose. And what is this appropriate amount? You require only 15 to 20 gram of glucose to increase by 30 40 milligram of blood sugar. So if you started at 60 or 70, in hospital scenario, it is rarely go below 60 because you are checking it regularly. So you require around 20 to 25 gram of glucose, and that is by 50 to 60 ml sufficient to put patient into the safe zone of more than 100 milligram. So if there is a recurrence of hypoglycemia, even by altering the insulin infusion dose, then you can repeat it, but you have to recheck the blood sugars after 15 minutes if your patient is having symptoms of hypoglycemia. And what are the symptoms of hypoglycemia that you should look? And because your patient may be on beta blockers here, patient may be unconscious, diaphoresis, sweating is the most important, and irritability. These are the two most important factors, symptoms you should look in your patients who are even comatose. They can have diaphoresis. Even patient on beta blockers can have diaphoresis. You may not have your heart rate going up and your swings in hemodynamic, but diaphoresis will be there even those patients who are on beta blockers. So sweating, profuse sweating, specifically on forehead and on the back, they are the most important thing that you can say that your patient is symptomatic for hypoglycemia. For symptomatic patient, 15 minutes checking, and for asymptomatic patient, 30 minutes repeat testing. And if you require the dose still, then you can increase, again, give that bolus of 25% dextrose. Now, how to monitor? Point of care blood glucose monitor should be used in that is being used in most of our ICU setting. But the suggested protocol is 1 hourly interval initially, then 2 hourly if you have got 3 consecutive readings falling within the desired target range, and 4 hourly if your target range is maintained for consecutive 24 hours, and then you keep on increasing the gap, but you have to revert back if you have got hyperglycemia. Now, monitoring, as again, now it has been technology entering in our ICU like CGMS and also flash glucose monitoring can be used. There are more preferences building for these type of modalities which can be used. But importantly, doubtful accuracy, there is a lag period, interstitial fluid and blood sugars, they have got lag period. Rapid hemodynamic swings can be in doubtful accuracy for these. Interference with paracetamol, specifically in COVID, more than 4 gram per day, then vasoconstriction. Also, point of care devices like glucometer can have doubtful accuracy in vasoconstriction, in digital oligemia, temperature changing in ICU, PCM, aspirin, vitamin C infusion, specifically in COVID patient. Then there can be doubtful accuracy even in your glucometers also. But the best way is dedicated arterial or venous port for acid blood gas analysis and electrolytes that can be used for blood sugar analysis, or subcutaneous or continuous subcutaneous sensor place like your CGMS. Now, whether we should use other type of analogs that can be used in infusion, yes, you can use regular human insulin most commonly, but Aspart, Fiasp, and Lispro, they can also be used as an infusion. And there is a study from Udvardia et al. They showed that if you use Fiasp, Aspart insulin, there is better and rapid achievement of blood sugar target with least amount of hypoglycemia. And they are all recommended. And now, transition from IV insulin to subcutaneous insulin, this is again sometimes sometimes it is a faulty approach that leads to rebound hyperglycemia in our patients. So you have to calculate total daily dose. And for total daily dose, either you take 24 hours or you take 6 to 8 hours of stable dose. Then you multiply by 4. This will give you total daily dose. And for this, you can shift your patient to subcutaneous insulin. But before stopping your insulin infusion, give a 2 to 3 hours of overlap. Give NPH or basal insulin analog, preferably preferable to regular human insulin and preferable to your rapid acting insulin analog. NPH and basal insulin analog are preferable overlapping insulin dose to be given 2 to 3 hours before stopping the IV insulin, and the dose to be for use for subcutaneous injection. Further, total dose should be taken 60 to 80% of total daily dose that should be used for further use, and 50% should be taken as basal and 50% should be taken as boluses. So this is how you shift your patient from IV insulin to subcutaneous insulin. So the key take-home messages for my talk: hyperglycemia in ICU is very frequent. Around 50% of your patient will be admitted with hyperglycemia in your ICU. Hyperglycemia is a potent prognostic marker. Rather, it is a driver for adverse outcome with 2 to 3-fold risk increase in morbidity and mortality. IV insulin infusion is the mainstay of treatment of hyperglycemia in ICU. General targets to be maintained between 140 to 180. Selected patients, I've alluded to you, 110 to 140, especially in CTVS, sepsis, and burns patient. Frequent monitoring is the key, and avoidance of hypoglycemia is the most important thing that has to be done. So I will stop here, and I will thank you all for the patience here.